I know some guys who are amazing. They'll fly 3,000 miles around the world to minister to strangers, but can't walk 30 feet across their living room to minister to their own wives. So it's like, really, how strong are you? Another guy will go work out for 4 hours at the gym, but can't hold a 40-minute conversation with his wife. So how
Sure.
strong are you? See, for me, I'm like, no, no, no. The greatest fight that you will ever experience, the greatest purpose you will ever experience is loving your family well and watching the redemptive purpose of the people in your home come into its fullness because you didn't give up.
Well, welcome to the Eyes on Jesus podcast with Drew and Tim. Drew is off on a cruise, so I am here with a special guest today, Jake Hamilton. Jake is a speaker, author, songwriter, and visionary behind the men's movement, The Fight. And his new book is The Journey to Biblical Masculinity, 12 Paths Every Man Must Take. I have it here in the video. Jake, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm, hiding out in a friend's office because the internet exploded at my house. So I'm just glad it all worked out.
Absolutely. Well, let our listeners know, fill in your bio a little bit. Anything else you'd like to share about your family or ministry, that kind of
Yeah,
stuff?
I mean, we've been in full-time ministry for like over 2 decades. We, fell into ministry when we were in our 20s. My wife doing ministry and being a church planter, and we have 3 kids. They're now older, so it's kind of a wild season for us because we're just getting out of the kid phase in that sense.
Yeah.
We got a 20-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 16-year-old, and so, it's a wild season for the
Mm.
Hamiltons, especially because we've been transitioning from sort of itinerant ministry worship leading into, men's work. And so it's been a great season for the Hamiltons. So it's been awesome because then I get to do interviews with guys like you and get to have like great conversations. So it's been a lot of fun for us.
That's awesome. So
Yeah.
your years of being worship leading and songwriting and things like that, talk to us a little bit about that because a lot of people know you from that and kind
Yeah.
of, what were some takeaways from that, both positive and maybe not so positive, during that journey through that.
Well, that's actually how we ended up in doing men's work. I mean, the short version is I heard the Lord when I was 18. Inner voice, outer voice, not sure. We can, everybody can debate that theologically later. I'm not interested, but I heard an inner knowing from God when I was 18, when I heard that the Lord said that you're going to write the songs the whole world will sing. And I latched onto it and just wrote and wrote and wrote. And we planted a church and we did worship leading. We did all this stuff many, many years, got signed to Jesus culture through crazy random events. And then all of a sudden now I'm, fast forward 2010, I'm playing in front of 17,000 people at Allstate Arena in Chicago at the Jesus culture event with all these other huge names. And we're sitting there and my marriage is not doing great. There's no addiction, no pornography, nothing, no affairs, nothing like that. Just I'm a full on workaholic. And when you're a workaholic in ministry, you get applauded instead of getting accountability. People love that you're a workaholic in the church. So it was very much like people were like, go further. It's the calling of God. Your family has to pay a cost. And it was like, it really was. It was destroying my family. And my wife showed up to that event. The next morning, we're sitting in front of a pastor who's been a friend of ours for years. And he asked my wife, who did not have a dad, who didn't grow up with a father, and looked her in the eyes as a dad and said, how are you actually doing? And she just starts weeping. And my wife doesn't cry. Like we joke a lot, like I'm the emotional one in our marriage. So she's like way more like in that sense, she carries more of the masculine and I'm just super emotional. And so she just fell apart. And 5 hours later, we're having conversations where she's like, I'm not leaving you, but this isn't a marriage. And the whole
Mm.
thing falls apart in the midst of me leading at one of the largest things I'd ever led at. And I felt like the Lord really said that this is your sort of Abraham Isaac moment. Like, are you willing to put this thing that is my promise on the altar for something better? Like, can you
Mm.
find something beyond that? And
Yeah.
so we laid everything down, the entire ministry and worship leading, the whole deal as primary got really laid down. Now we had to do some traveling because of work and like, paying bills and stuff we just minimized everything. But when we were on the road, we went as a family, and behind the scenes, we'd show up at these big events and pastors would be asking like, how are you guys doing? And we're like, it's awful. Our marriage is falling apart and we're
Mm.
really working on it. Like just being,
Yeah.
we're just really open books. I think you can find our entire marriage story online. So we shared the whole thing. What was crazy about it for us was that every pastor behind the scenes said the exact same thing. hey, can we talk to you guys afterwards? We're really struggling. And it was like conversation after conversation after conversation. And we realized,
Mm.
oh, this isn't just us. Like, this is a massive issue in the body of Christ. This is a massive issue in culture that's infiltrated the church, or whichever way you believe it went. And now there's people who don't talk about it. And we're seeing a lot of the ramifications of that in the church right now. But a lot of that led us to starting with marriages. And fast forward into the story is that we met with a really well-known pastor who was really gracious to sit down with us as we were doing some of the marriage stuff. And he said, if you really want to get marriages, like, you have to go get men. And he's like,
Mm.
you're not going to save marriages if you can't transform a man's heart. And I believed him. I was like, yeah, that's absolutely true. So that is what transitioned us into starting a little group in the garage. There's some other stories, but really it led us on sort of this pursuit of, no, we're getting men for the sake of transforming marriages, because marriages transform legacy, which transforms culture. And so we're
Yeah.
like, let's focus all our guns on that. And that's what we've been doing for a lot, like the last decade.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing. And, oftentimes we're told to sacrifice our family on the idol of, ministry or work
Yeah.
or fill in the blank, right? And it's for the
Yeah.
good, it's for the long run. You'll have time later on. And it's like, well, what about today? What about this week? What about this year? Because time flies, and like before you know
That's
it, your
it.
kids are up and out, and then you wonder why, you didn't pour into them like you should have. And then you're like, now they're, facing whatever. And it's like, let's take every opportunity we have as our family, as our first ministry in our marriage, to
Yeah.
focus on that first. And then out of that, things will flow. Right. And I'm so glad you guys saw that, because, you ignore those warning signs for so long. And before you know it, well, we know what happens, right? We see it time and again in broken families, and pastors who fall from grace, or pastors who jump into sin is probably a better way to say it.
At
They
this
don't.
point,
Yeah, and so it's like, well, there's got to be a better way, and I'm glad that you're a voice for that now, and realizing that marriages can be saved. Like, God's ideal is for marriages to be focused on Him and united together, right? Let no man break what God has joined
yeah,
together. And so, even though there's 100,000 issues that can come into marriages, right? Like, ultimately, the answer is Jesus. And if you keep asking the question without wanting the true answer, then you're going to just keep looking for answers in other forms. And so, when you focus on marriages, what are some things like you would hit like first? Like, if you like meeting with a couple or in a group setting, what are some key things you want to get out of the way first, to help marriages that are struggling?
yeah. There's some strong feel. We talk about this in three terms. We talk about it in theological, psychological, and then we add in mythological, and the idea of story and how story plays a part in the midst of really like a cultural story. What Carl Jung would call the collective unconscious, what we know as the kingdom of God, what we know as Holy Spirit, that connects all of us together. We're all in the same body, whatever language you want to use. But there is an overarching narrative we're all connected to in a very specific way. But we really start with, on a very basic level, start with something called attachment theory. Milan and K and Milan Jurkovic, a great Christian therapist out of Southern California, they wrote a book called How We Love. So they call it love styles. We really work with that framework when it comes to couples, and the basics of that framework, without going too deep into the tool where we could spend hours walking through it.
Sure.
The basics of it is, you do not love how you want to love. You love how you were taught to love, and you
Mm.
receive love how you were taught to receive love. So you can say you want something, but the reality is you're going to default to what you experienced growing up. And that attachment style is what's defining your marriage. So those triggers, and when we get to the sort of theological part of it, I always say this, which is like, at the end of the day, like, God is going to get you to marry all of your triggers. You will marry every one of your triggers, and it is not the enemy. It is 100% God, because marriage is the place where we're supposed to be held, contained, cared for, and healed in the midst of a relationship that's supposed to last a lifetime. That's why it's a covenant, because it's unto death, not because it's so great. It's unto death because you are going to want to get out. Like,
Right.
if you're doing it well, that's what
Yeah.
people don't understand. They think if we're doing this right, it should feel good all the time.
Yeah.
That's not true in any area of your life. Health, faith, finances, any area. If your goal is comfort, you're going to burn that thing to the ground very,
Mhm.
very quickly. So what we try to help couples understand is you're not dealing with the person in front of you. You're dealing with the relationships you had growing up. Because, and again, from a theological standpoint, God saves you from your sin, not your story. So the idea is you keep your scars, you keep your wounds, but the ramifications of the sin that can come from those scars, that's covered in the blood. That's been redeemed. That's all theologically accurate. But what we do is we go, oh no, my whole story is buried. Well, if that's true, then you lose your personality, you lose your understanding, you lose your perspective, all which are beautiful about you. We don't want to lose any of those things.
Yeah.
We want to see them redeemed so that you can have an understanding of how your pain is manifesting in your marriage and costing you connection. And so using some of those basic tools to go, hey, listen, let's talk through your story. Like, let's talk through your pain. And there's all these trigger words right now that are like, when misused and not given context, they're awful. Everybody wants to talk about trauma and trauma work and all these things. I'm like, great, that's all awesome. And we do use some of that. We just talk about the fact that your greatest purpose is hidden in your pain. And everybody's greatest purpose is for family to remain whole, to remain steadfast, because marriage is the greatest image of God on planet Earth from the beginning of Genesis to the end of the entirety of Scripture. We see that as the model, which is the reason we are fighting for it so hard, because it bears his likeness and image, unlike anything else on planet Earth. So when we walk through attachment styles, love styles, that's really where I start with a lot of couples. With men specifically, I go, at the end of the day, you need a model that's bigger than your dad and your uncle and your grandpa. And we just bring everybody back to a Christ-centered model of what it means to be a man. And that everything that we need to understand about being a man is found in the man, Jesus Christ. And not just the God of the image that he portrays, but the reality of a man exemplified on planet Earth, the way he loved, the way he sacrificed, the way he gave, the way he focused on his bride, which did not treat him kindly, which we tell men all the time. It's like there's a whole lot in there for us to unpack. And what we want to do is bring everybody back to their story, bring everybody back to Christ, the center, and then allow them to walk forward one little baby step at a time. There is no quick way to this. And that is also something that has to die pretty quickly in couples, because most of them want it fixed now. And there is no quick fix to this. This will take the rest of your life. And that's why you're supposed to be signed up for it for that long.
That's so beautiful too. I love how you said Jesus saved you from your sin, not your story. We still have that story that sticks with us. And you don't get this blank slate, that your memories are wiped, when you come to Jesus, right? I mean, that would be, I guess, nice. But what you're saying is like, there's a purpose to your whole history, both good and bad. And so if you just try to look past that, or like, I just want to forget all the bad stuff, is like, well, now you can look at it with, Jesus colored glasses, if you will, and say like, no, I can see him in the midst of that. I can see where he's taken me from. And so much of today, we try to, get rid of the pain, get rid of feeling things, which we medicate, or we, cut our lives short, or we look for, things in the wrong places.
Even drench in religion. Religion, it can be just as dangerous. I'll make it very, very dramatic, but I'm like, religion is just as dangerous as pornography. Both of them are attacking the same core need for connection, for intimacy. What it is, it's a comfort version of that. It's the junk food version of what is supposed to be deeply real and true. And we see this in the life of Jesus, because after he resurrects from the grave, what does he keep? The only thing Jesus keeps is his scars. That's the only thing. And if that's not the model of what we're called to, hey, we got born again, we got redeemed, we got saved, we got all these things, but we keep our scars. And what does he do with his scars? He destroys doubt. Doubting Thomas is like the key that unlocks it for me, because I'm like, wherever there's still fear in your life, because doubt is just a manifestation of fear that things aren't going to work out the way I'd hope. So now I've got fear that can be dealt with because I engage with my scars, not hide them from everyone. When Jesus fully displays his scars, now we have access to destroy the doubt that's been haunting us and plaguing most of our lives and our faith experience.
Yeah. And, the enemy loves to make us feel like we're isolated. We're the only person feeling that way, or the only one that struggles with this. And it's out of those feelings that we feel like everyone else is perfect but me. And, I like the philosopher Plato says, everyone's fighting a battle, so be kind. And when you realize everyone's fighting a battle and we have
Yeah.
a world that just wants to demonize everybody and, me versus you, is that everyone is struggling with something, right? Like there's no perfect person other than Jesus. The only perfect person walked this earth and he's our model, but also we'll never be perfect. And so it's constantly a process, but also I think enjoy the journey a little bit. Like realize that you're going to mess up. That doesn't mean you're a horrible person. Don't speak death over yourself, but move into the life that Jesus called you to and learn from it, right? Like don't make the same mistake 500 times, but at the same time, realize you're going to make it. And then that's where you have to seek accountability. That's where you have to seek breaking out of that isolation shell, which
Yep.
2020 taught us killed so many people just from isolation alone. And now there's still this, like, I think even coming out of those years and, being in ministry the last few years has been crazy, but also understanding that people are dealing with new levels of trauma through isolation and dependency upon things besides Jesus. And the fact that Jesus is the answer to all these things, but some people just love asking the question over and over. Well, what's going to fix it? What's going to be this? What's going to
Yeah.
be this? They know it's Jesus, but it's another thing to know it and another thing to get him into your heart and actually follow through on it. And I love that you make your book practical on this journey because, it's not this, okay, now I'm 18, I'm all of a sudden a man, right? That doesn't happen. And so
That would be
you
so
call
nice.
it would be, right? You call it this journey to biblical masculinity
Yes.
that might take longer for some than others, but talk a little bit about the actual word journey and what that means for younger men listening, older men that are still like, well, I don't even understand biblical masculinity because I read the news and I read social media and I'm told that, I have no purpose or I'm told that I should be this or that, like just help us guide us into a little bit of this journey that you talk about in your book.
Yeah, we use the word journey a lot, the word paths a ton, all of these different things. We use a lot of that language because I mean, my core philosophy is there is no arrival. So if you're looking for arrival, you're done. It's
Yeah.
because you're going to be super frustrated because if there's this point of one day I'll arrive, then all of a sudden you're like, I'm not getting there fast enough. So then it turns into one of two things. It's either your fault or it's my fault. And both lead to greater degrees of shame, greater degree of frustration, greater degrees of bitterness, all which causes the thing to fall apart. There is no rival. There's no perfect Christian. There's no perfect husband. There's no perfect father. There's no perfect anybody in your business, whatever your career is. There's nobody perfect. So we have to let go of this idealism that tells us one day I will arrive. We have to let go of it. We're just not going to, that's not going to happen. And it's going to be okay. We're going to have a really great time as we walk through this. Because once I let go of that arriving, I'm allowed to just be in the process. I'm allowed to be in it with others. I'm allowed to make fun of my own brokenness. We just can't take ourselves too seriously. We are all, like you said earlier, we are all dealing with a degree of brokenness that we're not even fully aware of, dude. Like, that's the crazy part is like, we think we're like, no, I know where I suck. And it's like, no, you actually don't.
Yeah.
Most men that I deal with, they're like, here's my issue. And I'm like,
Ask your spouse. Yeah. She'll tell you.
yeah, that might be an issue, but there's a lot of other things. And the way that we kind of map it out is there's several people who've said this. It's not an original idea from Jake Hamilton or The Fight, but there's really only two things that bring transformation in a human soul, which is great love or great pain. So that's the only two things that'll transform you. You can go to all the classes, read all the books, do all the things, but really until you've experienced great love that sees beyond who you are today and sees what you're really capable of and loves you in your brokenness, you're not going to change. Or you have such a painful experience in some way, shape, or form of your life where you have value that will cause you to transform as well. Those are the only two things that cause lasting transformation. That's it.
That's great.
And from there, you are going to walk a road to your divine purpose to leave a legacy that outlives you. And that path is beliefs turn to values, turn to behaviors. And so what a lot of men do is they want to jump right to behavior modification, which is why the church is so good at moral superiority instead of personal transformation, because we really want behavior modification. So we start with accountability, which isn't really helpful if you don't recognize that your behavior is a manifestation of your deepest belief systems. Well, where did I get my belief system, Jake? I got it in the first 7 years to 14 years of my life. Now, if we're talking about manhood and masculinity, if we were talking about traditional roles of initiation or rites of passage in culture, you would be walked through a program essentially for the first 12 years of your life, 10 years of your life, depending on the culture, depending on the background, whatever, depending on the tribe. But for the most part, you would be walking a path to 12 years old, 13 years old, where you knew that you were going to be walking through initiation. Right now, young kids are essentially getting abandoned by their fathers, being abandoned by family, and they're left to figure this out on their own. Well,
Yeah.
I heard one guy say it this way. Look at it like if I gave you a hard drive, this is how we start. You are a hard drive. You are a real soul spirit being. You are a being inside of this shell. Okay. There's a part of you that is eternal. This is what we believe. This part of us that has been united to Christ, is united to Christ, and will continually be united to Christ forever and ever. Amen. And I believe in the resurrection body and all those things. But we are first and foremost inside of here. We have something really unique about us that is spirit. Just imagine it like a hard drive, right? So I give you a hard drive and I go, here, write me a document. And you're like, this is a hard drive, buddy. And I'm like, okay, well, what do we first need to do? We need to put it inside of a body. We need to put it inside of a shell. We need to give it a thing, a space that it can actually work it out in real time. So now there's the second part. So now I've got a spirit and I've got a body, which is great. That's awesome. Now write me a document. Well, what am I missing? I'm missing the right programs. So the first 7 years of your life, psychologically, you are taking in programs that teach you how to love, how to connect. Are you afraid? Are you going to fight? Do you have courage? Do you have conviction? What matters to you? What belief systems? What values? All of that is being programmed into you at a very young age by the experience, by the circumstance, by the family that you have been a part of. And when we can begin to understand that, then we can be a lot kinder to ourselves because the behaviors are manifesting in our life because of that belief system. From great love or great pain, I set up a belief system, which is my thought patterns. I turned those into values, which is my heart. And now they're becoming behaviors that flow out of my life. If you want to change your behaviors, you have to go backwards and change your belief systems. This is the journey. You go back and go, what pain or what love defined the belief systems I'm operating in today? We call this story work with the fight. It's called story work. And we go back and we walk through those very carefully. And the goal is, there's a lot of programs that'll be like, okay, we're going to find Jesus in your story. Let me just be honest with you. Finding Jesus in your story is the easy part, because in all honesty, if you have any idea who Jesus is, he's always going to be there. He's always going to be kind. He's always going to be merciful. He's always going to be offering hope. He's always going to be offering love. All of these things we know. The real question is, where are you in that story?
Yeah.
Where are you in that story? And what did you learn in that story? Because that defined your perspective of not only yourself, but of God, family, and everything else we just talked about. When we can find that story, we can then begin to change the belief system, which means I can change my emotional state, which means my behaviors will transform naturally. That's the path we're trying to put men on. That's the journey that we're putting men on. In all these different ways, we use 12 paths inside of the book, but the journey of those paths is allowing me to reframe my belief systems so that my behaviors transform naturally. Because discipline without understanding the belief system, I say it this way all the time. You don't get skinny by not wanting to be fat. That's not the way this works. I can't love God because I think it's going to make me a moral or good person. That it falls apart very quickly. And that's what most of us are doing. We're going in and raising our hands and worshiping, hoping that, we're just going in every Sunday, pulling on the arm of the slot machine, hoping it spits out money this week, hoping it spits out relationship this week, hoping it spits out, whatever it is I need. And instead of recognizing this is a journey, this is a life, this is long term. And when we set ourselves up for that, we can start finding more joy in the process, because I'm continually experiencing redemption and resurrection on a regular basis. I'm seeing it week after week, month after month, year after year. I'm seeing it, experiencing it on a regular basis instead of this event mentality. And we're moving from event to lifestyle. And that is the journey.
That's so good. Yeah. And I see that too in just casual Christianity that we've created in America, is the fact that, you just show up maybe once a week if you're lucky, or once a month, you just get that check mark in, and then that's the only time you talk to God. And then all of a sudden you hope that your life's going to be fixed and you're going to have the peace that passes all understanding because you kind of did the right things. It's your heart is the problem. Your heart
Yeah.
that doesn't seek relationship with Jesus first, and out of that flows. I mean, just think of all the things we have access to. The Bible says we have access to the Father, to the throne room, to come boldly to the throne.
Yeah.
And yet we think that I can just show up. I can show up late to worship. I can not raise my hands, think about what I'm going to eat for lunch, listen to a sermon, not retain any of it, not let any of it lead to transformation. And then, I'll see you in 2 weeks. Like, that is what I'm sick of, that we've kind of taught that that's it. You've made it, you've arrived. And there's so much deeper at work in flowing from your identity of who you are as a son of the Most High King or daughter. And then from that, realizing that I have access to what I need for today, right? And Jesus said, my
Mhm.
grace is sufficient for you, and to not even worry about tomorrow. And so if we focus on today, if we focus on what I need to get through and to push past even these hangups that you have, that I like how you talk about, the addiction that we look at as either medicating it or fixing it is the tip of the iceberg. It's just the very top.
Very
There's
small.
so much layers below it that needs to be fixed before you think that just removing a program or finding an accountability partner, as good as those things might be,
Yeah.
that's not going to fix the longing in your heart for more and for what might have caused it to be distorted to begin with, to not align with Jesus. And so,
That's the key.
yeah. And I think as men too, are invited to a bigger story with Jesus. We're invited to more than just these small worlds we build through our 9 to 5, or these houses or these areas that we feel like we need to control. We're invited to a bigger story. And I like how you say we've become a people who have given up on the mythological in exchange for the literal, the logical, and the theological. We have left our imagination at the door. And since we lost our ability to live in mystery and tension, and I think it's dangerous if we can feel that we can figure everything out, including God, and we put him in these little denominational boxes. We put him in these little controllable, things like, okay, I want you over here and I'll come to you when I need you, instead of this sense of awe and wonder of realizing how small we are, but also how big God is and how we're invited into a bigger story. And if all I have to do in the story is take care of my 2 kids and love my wife, like, that's amazing. That's what God has called me to. But also, like, maybe there's more, maybe there's more. Maybe I can, that's what I love about reading the Bible, is that you read it 100 times. There's always something more God can show you. There's always something, whether you're 8 years old or 80 years old, that God can reveal to you that you didn't know before, because we're on this journey. And I find that exciting. I don't find it boring. I find it that I want to get in the Bible. I want to learn more. I want to talk to people like you or read other books, because there's more that we can learn. And from that, we get this bigger picture of who God is, because, like, I don't know, like the people that actually saw God, revealed God in the Bible, that experienced these amazing things, right? They were flawed people. We see that over time, all over time, is that
Of course.
God used flawed people, men and women, to reveal greater purposes. And I just think, like, as flawed as I am, if God can use me somehow for his glory, like, that's the story I want to be a part of. I don't want to be a part of a story where I build this kingdom and then see my marriage falling apart because I have this title at work, which I used to chase. And I realized the folly of it, thankfully, before it was too late. And I think many men can relate to that.
Yeah. I mean, you're painting a great picture. I love what you said, Tim. Like, all of that is really it's an invitation to a greater story. It's an invitation to deep mystery and deep tension, but we're looking for just answers. And I love that Jesus presents himself as the way. Like, he's like, I'm the way. Well, what is that an invitation into? A gigantic journey, and an adventure unlike anything we've ever been on. And what we've done through social media and maybe some movies and some other things, we've like painted this picture that it's like, yes, that means missions and evangelism forever. And it's like, well, I know some guys who are amazing. They'll fly 3,000 miles around the world to minister to strangers, but can't walk 30 feet across their living room to minister to their own wives. So it's like, really, how strong are you? Another guy will go work out for 4 hours at the gym, but can't hold a 40-minute conversation with his wife. So how strong are you? See, for me, I'm like, no. The greatest fight that you will ever experience, the greatest purpose you will ever experience, is loving your family well and watching the redemptive purpose of the people in your home come into its fullness because you didn't give up.
That's right.
Like, you are that powerful. If we believe God is infinitely powerful and infinitely strong and infinitely wise, all these things, just to make the gigantic list of all the names of God that we've probably all gone through and all this stuff. If he is that, He's not afraid of you being as big as you can be humanly possible to take on the challenges that you will come across primarily in marriage and family. Because the enemy's not after your job, he's not after your money, he's after your grandchildren.
Yeah.
And he knows that to get to a kid, he has to get to a mom. But in order to get to a mom, he has to get to a dad. And if that dad abdicates his role, then the mom is free reign to go after. And now she has to protect herself, which means she cannot protect the children, which means the children are now open for deception in ways that have never been available to them before. And that is what we're seeing happen in culture because we're thinking that all the adventure is out there. And the adventure is in two places, in here and in my home. Those are the greatest adventures you're ever going to have, to go as deep as you can into the story of God in your own life and to develop that story into a communal story within your family that then has its own community and culture and relationships and church communities and all that beautiful stuff. But we have not taught men to go to war with the same ferocity for their story and their family story as we've taught them to go into war for the gospel in the nations.
Yeah.
And I want the gospel. I do it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I want to see the gospel in the nations. But if you are more passionate to go out there than you are to go in here or in your own home, it's 30 seconds from falling apart. And then guess whose fault it is? It's God's fault. And,
Right.
and that's what ends up
man.
happening. It's God's fault now. Well, he let me down. I served him and he let me down. No, you were serving yourself in the name of God. And he tore down that idol so that you would go back home. But you didn't hear that invitation because it wasn't as cool as being high-fived on a Sunday because you had a great testimony.
Yeah.
Like nobody, I think people should put more people on stage who are working 60-hour jobs, fighting for their family and aren't good at speaking. And they get up on a Sunday because they show up and they're faithful and they love their family and they love their kids. They've never gone anywhere more than an hour from their home, but they are fighting for something more than most people I've ever seen get on stage because they're fighting for it consistently on a regular basis. These are good men and they're sitting in the back rows of our churches and we give them no praise. In fact, they feel stupid when they leave church because the guy who went around the world and ministered the gospel to some strangers, he just feels now he's like, well, now I'm inadequate. Like you're not celebrating family. You tell me that's what you value, but that's not what's being put on the platform. You're not celebrating that. You're celebrating the guy who had all the money. You're celebrating the guy who had all the stuff. I'm working a 9 to 5. I'm busting my butt every day because I love my family. And we say that's what we value, but it's so not sexy. You know what I mean? It's
hey, I love
sexy.
I love conferences too, but we chase, even personally, we chase these men or women, we chase the conference because that's going to fix us. And if that's the focus, I'm all for growing in knowledge and learning from things. And hey, God, in a moment, I've seen him change people from 30 years addicted to something and no longer touch it. That happens, but it's not as sexy to say, I'm going to get in my quiet time consistently for the next 30 days. That's not as sexy as going to a conference and getting this hype. Right. And so we need both. We need this level of okay, something bigger than myself, but also getting into the quiet place. I just read this morning a book I'm reading, a devotional. He talked about, radiation. When you go into radiation to get it for cancer, you don't feel it right away. Over time, you're oh yeah, it's working. It's burning this off. And that's what it's like getting in the secret place. I might not feel anything, but over time it is fixing your soul because you're getting connected to the life giver. That's awesome. I do want to talk to you about this concept of initiation again. And my son's 16. You said your son is 16, along with some older ones as well. And I'm curious, just as a parent, there's so many convoluted messages in the world. And there's so much that's, sometimes even it's okay, now I'm 16, I get a car, right? Well, not unless you work for it. I'm not just going to hand you a car. You need this idea of hard work has to come in at some point. Or, I even told my son, just because you are in college, now you have the opportunity to, everything we've taught you, now it becomes your decisions, where we're not just, over your head saying, did you complete your homework? Did you do this? Did you do that? What is going to be your decisions when you have that autonomy, right? What are you going to decide? Because it's your life ultimately. I showed him, we just recently watched Gladiator and Braveheart, two movies that are manly, fight for war, something bigger than yourself, and it's I just gave him the book Wild at Heart, classic. So I'm just trying to think of what are some good ways to bring, sons especially into this bigger story when they're at this vulnerable age.
I would read Iron John by Robert Bly. That's number one. That's the first book on the list, dude. If you're going to have him read anything, you guys want to read something together, Iron John by Robert Bly. It was a foundation for the mythopoetic men's movement, but it also laid the foundation for promise keepers. And nobody talks about that stuff. And it's like this, the idea of initiation was a mystical process for men to walk through as young boys that would connect them and answer three questions. It answered three questions. Who am I? Where do I belong? And what do I do with my pain? Well, these are questions that every 40, 50-year-old man is asking. Why? Because they didn't get it answered at 12 or 13. Right. Who am I? Like, so a mother wound, and I'm going to go a couple different directions. You can tell me where you want to go, but like with who am I, you're dealing with the mother and father, right? So a mother provides you, in terms of overall context, should be the first encounter you have with unconditional love. A mother says, I love you regardless. That's why scripture talks about what woman leaves a child nursing at the breast, because a mom loves you regardless. You were grown in her and you came out of her body. There's a connection there as a mother, and then it ends up being like, your son burns down the house and it's like, but he was so cute. He was trying to build a campfire in the living room. He's so adorable, and it's like, he's just so loved and amazing. And again, we're talking in fullness, right? So a mom gives you unconditional love. A dad is the first love that chooses you. So a mom, unconditional love. A dad says, I choose you and I'm going to prepare you to send you out. A mom says, I love you and I'm going to keep you close as long as possible. So you need both of these energies and these roles to exist inside of a home. You need those places to exist to be able to fully understand what love looks like. So initiation in a practical sense begins when a mom and dad understand the traditional roles and values of a mother and father within the home and the upbringing of a child. So that's just step one. Do you have a mom and a dad or a man and a woman in your life? Because there are a lot of fatherless sons. So, okay, you don't have a dad. Is there a man in your life who's choosing you, not for the sake of what you can accomplish for him, but for the sake of going, hey, I'm picking you and I'm going to help you become who you're supposed to become. I see you. That's what it is. That's a blessing. Literally, the word blessing, if you go back in history, doesn't mean anything supernatural. Really, what it means is I see you and I affirm God in you. Like, even namaste, like it's like all supposed to be new agey and stuff, but the word is awesome. Namaste means God in me recognizes God in you. That spirit of eternal God in me. Now we know his name, we know all those things, but that beauty of that phrase of like, God in me recognizes God in you. I see God in you and I'm going to call it out and I'm not going to let you miss it. So that first part of who you are needs a mom and a dad. Then second, you get that, where's my tribe? So where can I return home to? That's why the prodigal son story is so powerful, right? The story isn't about a prodigal son. That's the stupidest title for the name of that story ever. It's the story is a really, really good dad. Like that's the name of that story. That story has nothing to do with the prodigal son. That's just the guy who ran away. The story is really about how does a father provide love? When you have provided a context in a community for a son or a daughter where they could go into the deepest depravity they've ever gone, and their first thought in that depravity is, I could go home to my family.
Right.
Now you've created an unstoppable situation for growth. Because our kids are not all, like I would love to say, all of your kids are going to follow Jesus for the rest of their lives and never going to have one day of rebellion. Maybe, okay? I hope that for you. But the truth is, we all have walked our paths and we need them to have the safety to walk their path so that they can return and know what return feels like. So where's my tribe becomes my church tribe, my cultural tribe, my family tribe. Where is that tribe that I'm returning back to with my experience? And it will be contained and cared for. It will not be judged. It will not be given shame and guilt, but it will be given and offered kindness, the same kindness that leads us to repentance, right? So there's that tribal piece. So that's the next piece. Where are we building that for our kids? Are we giving them a tribe? But do they know anybody outside of the home? I've given my sons tons of men in their life that they know at any moment they can call. And I can list them right now, 5 dudes at any point that they can call, whether they want to talk about business, they want to talk about God, they want to talk about their family, they want to talk about anything. And they know that those men will not report back to me that those boys are safe to reach out to those men. because those men will make sure that they are seen and heard and cheered for and called into their fullness. So we need that tribe. Then the last one being, what do I do with my pain? And a lot of us don't know what to do with that. It's why we're still wounded from the things that hurt us 15 years ago where we grew up. We didn't know what to do with it. What do I do with this instead of turning it into shame and guilt, or instead of escaping from it and minimizing it? How do I engage with it? What are the practical tools of engagement I can learn as a young man? And you already mentioned one of them. Work hard. Like, you have to show up. Or you're a man of your word. Did you say you would do this? Then you're going to finish it. But I don't want to. It's irrelevant what you want.
It's your flip time. Yeah.
This is how men engage with their pain, because you're going to bring that same attitude into your marriage. So if you bring it into your job when you're 13, you're going to bring it into your marriage when you're 30. Well, I don't want to anymore. Well, I don't give a crap what you want. Life is not about what you want. And I tell men this all the time. Like, this is never about you. Like, biblically, this is not about you. It's open your Bible, Genesis 1, day 1, no you. Day 2, no you. Day 3, no you. Day 4, no you. Day 5, no you. Day 6, like, you show up after everything's taken care of, because God is that good. He did not create you first and then ask your opinion. What he did was he set your life up. He knew every hair on your head. He knew all that you'd accomplished. And what he did was he set you up for it. Your brokenness, your flaws, all of it can be contained in your purpose if you're willing to look at your pain. And that for a 30-year-old is different now, because now I'm going, hey, you want to walk through initiation? Awesome. Let's go to the most painful stories of your life, because hidden in that pain is your divine purpose. So let's go back and look at them so that we can now get initiated and walk into something better. So that's really the key for me, is those 3 questions are what we walk through. We have an initiation weekend where we do with the fight. And we're doing our first Father and Sons event next year in Alaska. So that'll be awesome. Yeah. And so we're doing that up in Alaska in June. But we're trying to make sure that ultimately, long-term, we're connecting fathers to sons, men to young men, so that we can walk them through this. I tell people I'm only starting the fight to grow up hundreds of wise elders so that we can start the greatest youth ministry in history. Because at the end of the day, all I'm trying to do is go back and get 12-year-olds. But there's no men to do that right now, because no man right now has been initiated. Yeah. So if you're not going to walk through it at 30, 40 years old, when you should have gotten it at 12, then how are you ever going to have value for walking back and doing this with a 12 or 13-year-old? And so those are the 3 questions that we kind of walk through when it comes to rites of passage, initiation, and connected to that, back to the Robert Bly thing. The thing that does this better than anything else is mythological stories. So a dad with young kids, or even teenage kids, ask me all the time, well, where do I start? I was like, tell them stories. I'm talking The Green Knight, Iron John, Lindworm, Lady Ragnell, The Listener. I mean, I can list 10 mythological tales. Just read them. Memorize them to the best of your ability, and then just share them. Like, tell the stories. Like, I started telling my kids stories at 11 or 12 years old when I first got some of this understanding. And what it does is mythology, which is why Jesus told parables. It says in 2 of the Gospels, he never taught without telling a fake story. Now, we can call them parables, but they're not real stories. There was no real prodigal son. Oh, he might, but Jake, he referenced them from like real life. Yes, that's called mythology, just FYI. You can even take it really far and call them fairy tales if you want. I don't care. My whole point is they're not real stories. They are a story that points to a greater truth. Why did God use that? Because now I can hear the story without paying a personal price for the pain in that story. So now I can see my own pain without shame and guilt. Like, the best example is David and Nathan. David sins with Bathsheba. Nathan knows by the word of the Lord that David has done this. He walks in to confront David, and what does he do? Does he confront him head on?
No.
He tells him a story. David, there was a man with a lot of sheep, and David, there was a man with 1 sheep. The man with a lot of sheep stole the guy with 1 sheep stole his sheep, for the context and the purposes. He stole the sheep. What should happen to that man? And David goes, that man should be stoned. And Nathan goes, you are that man.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, that's what you do with mythology. Mythology goes, you are that man. You are that part of the story. You're in that part of the journey. And every man we do, a big story over 3 nights at one of our fight weekends. We do that over the course of 3 days. And every time men are sobbing, and I'm telling a story that's 600 years old. You know what I'm saying? And men
Yeah.
today are, they're like, I'm doing that. And I'm like, you are,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they can finally accept it.
Yeah. And David was humble enough to listen, and in the moment he could have been prideful and been like, get
Yeah.
out of here, or have him, killed. But you talk about humility in your book as one of those tenets of
Yeah.
the being part of the journey. And I've seen that in my life and other men is like, when you're in your 20s, like you'll fight because someone called you a bad name. And like when you're in your 40s or later, you'll be like, whatever, man. Like I'm cool with who I am. I don't need to fight to prove anything. And
Yeah.
I've even seen that in Christian, when I'm in my 20s, like I knew everything, quote, quote. I could listen to a sermon and tell you all the things you did wrong. Never had gone to seminary, had all this pride and self, religious spirit. And now I listen to something I don't necessarily believe. And I'm like, that's interesting. Why don't I see where they're coming from? I don't have to believe it, but at the same time, they're believing it for a certain reason. And maybe I need to see it from their point of view. It's that humility that I think is so key. And so how do you bring that into the picture here with your book and with this journey the men are on? How can we, is it something we can attain early without having to go through those learnings of decades?
Absolutely. It's the same process. That's what initiation did.
Yeah.
Initiation broke it down to its fundamentals to recognize I am not the center of this universe.
Yeah.
Like, who am I in the context of this bigger story? Like, where's my tribe in the context of a global community? What do I do with my pain in the context of I can't make my wife carry every pain and burden I've ever been through? All of a sudden, it reminds you that you're not the center of the universe. And the hard part is you can only remain humble to the degree to which you recognize that you don't know everything. That's
Right.
it. See,
Yep.
that's what's so insane. The reason people or you don't believe what you say. I'll put it that way. That's why so many people are fighting over government right now. You're only if you're a Christian and deeply concerned over who's going to be president, you honestly don't believe the Bible yet. And I'm okay with that. But don't pretend you do. Because we serve a God who never leaves his throne, is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and is in charge of all governments for all time. And they
Yep.
will all submit to ultimately to his will. Now, I'm going to participate because I live in the United States of America and I live in a democratic republic and I get to vote. So I'm
Yeah.
going to vote based on my biblical convictions, based on my perspective and my experience. I'm going to do that. But ultimately, my hope is not in America.
Yeah.
My hope is not in who's president. My
Yeah.
hope is in Christ. That
Right.
is very humbling because I recognize I don't know why he's doing it. I don't know what he's doing. Now I can claim to, but the truth is any person who walks in front of you and is like 100% convinced they get it, dude, I always tell people, like, if a person gets on the platform and tells you, no, this is what God's doing, like 100% certainty, just yell heretic and go out and get a cup of coffee. It's going to be way more worth your time because in all honesty, we only see in part. We don't really fully understand how this is going to play out. And
Yeah.
when we carry that as a core understanding that I'm not the center of the universe and I'm never going to fully understand how God's working this thing out, then by nature, I have to humble myself to the process and the journey. I have to
Yeah.
humble myself when my wife and I aren't, it's not working out. It feels like, oh, dude, this is a bad spot. Or my kids are getting into something like that I have to pay attention to. I don't know why they ended up there. I have to look in the mirror and start with me. I have to start with my own like reality of what I brought into this situation and what my thought is bringing into this situation. What is triggering me emotionally? Why is this happening? Has a lot more to do with my perspective and my understanding about me in the center of the whole story than it does with the fact that I have to trust God. I have to trust that he is ultimately good and all things work together for the good of those who love him. Like you mentioned
Yes.
earlier, that I cannot live in anxiety and worry and fear about tomorrow because today has enough troubles of its own. So I'm just going to be at peace with the place that I have been given, with the story that I've been given, so that I can be fully present in the story he's given me, and so that I can be fully authentic in that, so I can present him well in all the ways that are available to me in this moment.
Wow. That's really good. And I've noticed that in myself too, just with like election season or things with war
Yeah.
is like in a moment, I'm like, well, what happens if this person gets in office or what happens if this escalates? And I have to
Right.
just remind myself in the moment, okay, either way, God's in control. And like, it's hard to explain, but like just in that moment that I say that, like it just goes away. Like I don't
Right.
linger on it. I don't dwell on it. I
Yeah.
just remember God's in control. Whatever he wants to happen will happen. Like, my one vote isn't going to sway it, even though I will vote. My
Yeah.
thoughts and my anxiety about it's not going to change a war. Like I just have to
Right.
submit to him and his plans and wherever he's taken this crazy world. So
Yeah.
Jake, I want to close just with, talking about the book and where they can get it, but also like you talk about this journey with Parzival and as a framework for biblical masculinity in the book. And some people may not, understand the story or why that's important. Just talk a little bit about why you use that story to talk about masculinity, and then maybe just close on where people can connect with you and get the book.
Yeah, Story of Parzival went through several iterations, French and Germanic, and then obviously translated into English at some point. But it was finished. It was started. I love this narrative. It was started by a monk who didn't like the redemption arc of where it was going because he felt it was too redemptive. So he stopped writing it. And then a knight picked it up and finished it. He was a troubadour. He radically loved God, but he was a knight by profession. And so he picked up the story and he finished it. Wolfram von Eschenbach, which is what I reference a lot in the story of the version of a story I tell. And what he did was he was able to bring in a beautiful redemptive arc because all of the biblical narratives are summed up in that story specifically. And it was used for generations for young men to understand the journey from boyhood to manhood. Even we have the Grail King, and the Grail King is this archetypical Jesus in there where he's the wounded king. He's the king with a wound that will not heal. And he is a suffering king who is hoping for the redemption of the land itself. And he needs someone to pick that up and live it out in his family line. And come to find out that Parzival, without, spoiler alert, Parzival goes through the redemption process, has to engage with his shadow, has to go through battles, has to fight for his family, has to understand his connection to his mother and his father and all these things. And it's the beautiful part of Parzival is it gives you the entirety of the arc of what we would hope in terms of mercy and love and grace and redemption and justification. But it also gives you those sort of masculine qualities of chivalry, of humility, of courage, of conviction. So it allows you to see all the brokenness and all the beauty that's in every man. Some people would tell you, that in every myth, it's not that you're one character in the myth, but the entire myth is contained inside of every person. And so for us to be able to tell that story around campfires for years, it was finally nice to write it down so that men all over the planet could engage with it and see it as a redemptive arc that we see in scripture. And it was like I said, I used the story primarily so that although men sometimes typically find themselves to not be theological, they feel a lot of, men that I work with, because I deal a lot with the men on the fringe. They radically love Jesus, but they consider themselves dumb. Like when it comes to scripture and stuff, they feel like they're never going to understand it, which I don't think is true. I don't agree with that. But the story of Parzival gives them an inroad. So all of a sudden you're seeing this biblical principle lived out in this mythological character. And then all I'm doing is building context for that biblical principle connected to the story that you're engaging with. And so that's the reason I chose it, because it has such a beautiful arc that I want men to engage with, and that they are, regardless of whether or not they know it, they are already engaging with it. We're just helping bring to light the things that they could be engaging with in their lives to grow from it and not just try to escape from it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. This is the book here. Where can people get it and connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if any of this sounds great to you guys, like just follow me on social media. Just follow me at DJ Hamilton, or you could follow what we do at This Is the Fight, at This Is the Fight. Just give us a follow. All the language is there. All the stuff we do is there. But I'm just really grateful to be on the podcast. I'm really grateful just that you would give me a chance to share. And really, if any of the language connects, just go give me a follow, and we can start a conversation from there of resources and stuff. But really, just the follow and understanding, getting more of the language that we're going after would be really helpful. And the book is available wherever you buy books, Amazon, the whole deal. So you can get it anywhere. And I'm really grateful for how the book's done and how people have connected with it. It's been a real blessing. It took several years to get done, and I think it was worth all the work we had to put in to make it happen.
Absolutely. Well, I'll put a link in the show notes to those things. And thank you again, Jake, for coming on. God bless you and your ministry. For everyone listening, until next time, go with God, grow in discernment, and keep your eyes on Jesus.
Thanks for joining us on the Eyes on Jesus podcast with Drew and Tim. Don't forget to hit subscribe